Hey, what's up? How's everyone doing today? Hi, Caitlin. How are you? Okay, I see you have a test tomorrow. That's brutal. But hey, you study for a unit test. You inherently are studying for the AP exam, right? I've actually got a buddy right now in my district who I just found out is giving a unit test leading up to the test for every unit. So it's like every other day they have unit 1, unit 2, unit 3, all the way up until the end, so that in theory they would have studied for the test 7 more times. I think it's a pretty good idea personally. So not to give your teachers any sick twisted ideas, but if I was getting my students prepared, I'd probably do that too. Also, I see where somebody's talking about the Princeton Review Manual. That's my favorite of the ones you can get like Books A Million or on Amazon. Also, the Kaplan book is really good. At this point, I wouldn't look at the AMSCO book because there's no key. So if you're still scrambling to get something, talk to someone who took the class before and let's see if you can't get access to a book. Sound isn't working. Can everybody else hear me? Can anybody else hear me? All right. So if some of y'all can hear me, then it's not on my end. So great. I appreciate that, y'all. All right. So a few things I wanted to talk to y'all about before I do anything else is I've had a lot of my buddies for Fiveable talking about doing something like an FRQ review on the Cram sessions, and I was already planning on doing this. So let me real quick share my screen with y'all, and I'm going to show you what I'm thinking here. So some of y'all are using Schoology. Thank you, Tan, for that. Some of y'all are using Schoology. Okay. If you're using Schoology, or even if you're not, Schoology is something that's free for you. You're able to create an account and basically join classes. Now, I wanted to show you that I've created in my Schoology account this course that's literally called APHE FRQ Review. And if you look here at this access code, all right, right here, all right, and I'll put this in the comments as well. It's not letting me get to it. But this here is access code for you to join my group, or as a class you can join. So go classes and join classroom, and you're able to get in here. And there is this FRQ. Now this right here was one of the 3 FRQs from last year's exam. This is the one that I graded. And so I spent all week looking at this one question. What I'm going to do is I'm going to model the writing of this question for you guys on the Saturday Cram session. And I'm also going to take a little bit of time to maybe pick 4 or 5 of the essays that are submitted to me and go through and show you how the readers would have gone about grading that. I think this would be extremely good for you guys to be able to see this. So we're going to model an FRQ during the Saturday Cram session, and then we're also going to go over and grade a few of the responses. So plan on that. So just want to let you guys know that's totally up to you whether or not you join the group. It's not something you have to do, but it's something that I think you could benefit from. So feel free. Let's start with some questions. What is an asylum seeker, and how is that different from a refugee? An asylum seeker is someone who is seeking to be a refugee, essentially. So if you are someone who has asylum, you are a refugee. Danny says refugee and displaced persons forced out of boundaries and cannot return safely. All right, asylum seeker comes to a place on their own. So real quick, to clarify, a refugee is someone who has gone out of their country's borders. All right. A displaced person is going to be someone who is internally displaced. All right. An internally displaced person is going to be someone who has had to be relocated within their country, but they haven't left, so they don't actually have that refugee status. Okay. When is your AP Human Geography test or final? Everyone's taking the AP Human Geography exam on the 14th, unless you're doing like a late test or a makeup or whatever it might be. That's the date of the exam. Central place theory. Gonna get to it in just a few minutes. Transhumance and pastoral nomadism. Transhumance is a form of pastoral nomadism in which usually you'd have someone like, let's say if you're grazing sheep, during the make sure I'm telling you right, during the summer months, they're going to go a little bit further up the mountain. All right. So they literally change their elevation so that they can have a better grazing for the animal, and then during the winter they'll go back down to the base of the mountain. So it's kind of like this cyclic up and down kind of form of pastoralism. So it is actually a form of pastoral farming. What case studies and ethnic conflicts do you believe are most important for the exam? It's hard to say. I would definitely say that I would know Yugoslavia, all right, the Balkans. I would know about Balkanization. I would know about devolution in response to that. I would think about it in the context of ethnic conflicts. All right. Also, I always talk about Rwanda. I always talk about Sudan, South Sudan. These are some of the ones we covered last week as well. So definitely take a look at last week's recording if you want a little bit of information on that. Yeah, Rwanda is definitely one that I would do. You can also, I mean, for context, I always talk about stuff that's going on today. So I always talked about Syria. That's old enough at this point that you might want to know about Syria. The Rohingya Muslims, I just heard an article today on, or I guess a podcast today on NPR where they're talking about the Rohingya Muslims that had to leave out of Myanmar because of persecution. So that's definitely one that is applicable, but I don't know if I would know that for the exam because it's a relatively new thing. What is the difference between space-time compression and distance decay? Space-time compression has to do with, like, if you look at the way technology has changed over time and the way that, for me, I live in, let's say that I live in near Columbia, South Carolina. All right, Charleston isn't much more than about 3 hour, no, sorry, not even that, about an hour and a half drive from Columbia. Maybe not even that long if you're driving fast. So back in 1845, before we had cars and interstates, it would have taken way longer than a couple hours to get to Charleston. So the fact of the matter is the space hasn't changed, but the time has compressed so that there's not as much time involved in going great distances. Airplanes, trains, cars are all things that have contributed to what we are looking at here as space-time compression. Distance decay is the idea that simply the further away something is, the least likely it is you're going to interact with that place directly. So let's say that I'm looking for a new job. I just finished up an administration degree, and now I'm looking for a job as a high school assistant principal. I'm probably going to look in places around where I live before I look in places like Alaska. So that's the concept of distance decay right there. Another way to think about it in practical terms is if you're shooting baskets and you're really good at free throws from the free throw line, you're more likely to hit the free throws than if you go under the other goal and just chuck it across the court. That's kind of what we're looking at with distance decay. Agribusiness versus commercial farming. Agribusiness is a part of commercial farming, but what you're looking at here is when you're looking at agribusiness, you're looking at when basically a single company or single company is going to control basically every part of what goes into the agricultural production. So they control stuff from the farming all the way to how it gets to your table. Usually whenever I talk about this, I'm looking at companies like maybe Tyson Chicken, who actually, recently apparently I just bought some of that from Kroger, and then I just got a recall saying there's like shards of metal and stuff in there. That's pretty frustrating. But anyway, they control stuff from the farming in some cases, or they work closely with people that farm the chickens, and then they will process and get the chicken ready, bag it up, get it to the stores. Basically, they control every part of that process. Another way of looking at agribusiness is companies that have to do with it. For example, I would say that Monsanto is an agribusiness company, but they don't really work as much in food production as they do in pesticides, is what they're known for, and GMOs. World Systems Theory is it's by Wallerstein, and the idea here is that there is a core region, both an economic and political core, that where it basically controls the majority of the world economics. And your core in Europe would have been basically Great Britain, Germany, France. And then outside of that is what you would call a semi-periphery. And the relationship between the core and the semi-periphery is that the core would take some of the resources or some of the light manufacturing from a semi-periphery and sell goods back to the semi-periphery. And then you've got what we call the periphery, which is the stuff on the outside of the global political and economic system. In other words, countries like Sub-Saharan Africa, which all they're really going to do is produce agriculture or have some kind of resources that are used by the core countries in order to manufacture what they need, and then what they need to sell to other countries, and what they need to sell to both the semi-periphery and the periphery countries. So that's kind of the relationship there with the world systems theory. There is a great video on YouTube by Carolyn Bednar's. If you look up Bednar's world systems theory, that is an excellent video for looking at more information on that than what I'm able to go through right now. That was covered in our unit unit 4 videos for sure. The central place theory, we're going to get that in just a second. Shifting cultivation, also known as slash and burn, occurs in the tropical region. So basically between the Tropic of Capricorn, Tropic of Cancer, mainly in places like Central and South America, Sub-Saharan Africa, anywhere there's going to be rainforest. The idea here is that they cut down some of the vegetation, all right, and then they burn it. It produces potassium or potash. It lays on the ground. The area is called a swidden, is going to be fertile for about 3 to 5 years before the group has to move to another area, another place in the same area, more or less, and they slash and burn and allow the vegetation to grow back up. Lately, people are talking about it as maybe not sustainable because of growing populations and because of CO2. All right, here we go. We're going to start the presentation. We're going to start the presentation. All right, and I'll go back and hit some of those questions. So if y'all want something done in particular with the questions, go ahead and upvote some. I've already got 25 questions I couldn't get to. We're going to get to as many as we can, right? But first, we're going to talk a little bit here about the urban geography. So our objectives, we're looking at the course description. If you guys want to see a FRQ, you have to be Fiveable Plus for this, but I am going to be modeling the FRQ I just showed you on Saturday. But this FRQ we did back in February 28th under the changes in agriculture. So if you're a Fiveable Plus member and you want to really hone down on how to write an FRQ, I recommend you go back and look at this one right here. Let me get my pointer. Look at this one right here. And then if you want to see how it was graded, look at this one right here, and that would give you some insight. All right, so industrial and economic geography, unit 6. Let's plow through it as much as we can. I may find myself skipping around because one thing I'm definitely going to do is look at the urban models, because that's a question I've been getting a lot of. That right there is a great YouTube video about the Industrial Revolution. The reason I'm putting it up there is because I don't intend on, sorry, I didn't mean to do that. I don't intend on talking about this. It's pretty clear, and it's also covered extensively in the Rubinstein book as well as other review manuals. So definitely know what the Industrial Revolution is, but for the sake of what we're doing, we're going to look a little bit deeper in that. And know also that when we look at what you need to know for the test, you're looking at the spatial perspective, the why of where. It's always going to be about why something is where it is and what that means to people. Human geography, right? Urbanization is going to be a result of industrialization. What that is we mean that people are going to start moving to cities. You also are going to start seeing migration of people, maybe from other countries into cities. But initially, we're looking at interregional migration. In particular, in Great Britain, people are going to move from the countryside into cities where these factories, as you can see here, begin to emerge, and jobs are available not only for the men but also for women and children. And people have a shot at higher wages than they've ever had before. Connections to agriculture. The second agricultural revolution is the reason for this shift from rural to urban, because people had enough food. Also, this is where you start the second stage of the demographic transition. People were living, in particular kids, weren't dying as much before they were 5 years old. They were living to be adults. You're also going to see some bad things, like city conditions are gross. They're going to be crowded. People are just throwing factories and throwing up buildings with no planning whatsoever and no sanitation. So you're going to see stuff like cholera. This is when John Snow goes around and basically uses geospatial data layering, much like a GIS, to create a map that shows where cholera is coming from in London. And then obviously the diffusion of the Industrial Revolution to the rest of Europe and to North America. We talked about industrialization on March the 21st. If you guys are interested in going back and looking at that, I really drilled down on the Industrial Revolution and the the Industrial Revolution, and also how that progressed throughout time. I mentioned the second and third Industrial Revolution, but the main thing I want y'all to know about is how industries have evolved over time. I don't need to worry about that terminology. Okay, so this one here is straight from the course description. All right, again, looking at what you need to know. And these are the indicators here. Industrialization began in response to new technologies, much like what I just now mentioned. They start using stuff like steam engines in order to get more access to coal and iron, which they then use to make more on machines and such. Let's see, in the study of geography and agglomeration, okay, answering questions. That's good if you guys want to help each other out there in the comments. Diffusion of industrialization led to growing populations, urbanization, in other words. Increased industrialization led to demands for raw materials. So this is going to kind of be the reason why many of these industrialized countries start to look for resources in places like Africa. Imperialism. There are three basic types of jobs and labor that you need to look at, and this is important also when you look at the core periphery of Wallerstein's world systems theory, as well as the international division of labor, because places based really on their development are going to be doing one of these more than the other. So when we look at primary, we're literally looking at something that is going to be extracted from the earth. All right, so whether that's a mineral, whether that's agriculture or hunting or fishing, any of that stuff, anything where you take something straight from the natural earth is going to be extracted. That's going to be a primary economic activity. All right, so here are some examples of what that might look like. You've got farming, forestry, mining, fishing, hunting, livestock, anything that comes from the earth. And notice also that these are examples of some pretty intense machine-driven primary economic activities. A lot of people in the world are using basic tools and are doing subsistence agriculture. Secondary economic activities are going to be manufacturing. So these are going to be done in your countries known as NICs, newly industrialized countries. In the world systems theory we were just talking about, these would be your semi-periphery. So the countries that are primarily doing agriculture are periphery countries. And let's face it, most of them are doing subsistence farming. They're trying to support their own family. But agriculture in and of itself is just not going to be as productive or as economically valuable as secondary and especially tertiary economic activities. So inherently, if a country has a manufacturing base, they're going to be better off developmentally than a country that's primarily doing agriculture. All right, so you might have countries like China, like Mexico, like India. They're going to be doing primarily manufacturers, and those are going to be semi-periphery, and this is what we're talking about. So anything that's manufactured, whether it's a shirt, whether it's something that's made out of iron, food processing, making cars. So there's different variations of what you're looking at here. I know in the United States, we will assemble stuff like cars and airplanes. You're not going to see that being done in places that we would consider usually semi-periphery. You might see a part of it being done, but not like what we're doing here. Tertiary economic activities are going to be doing something for someone. Now, here's the thing. You might not think about this. All right. For example, you might think you need to be really rich to afford a new iPhone, right? How much is that thing? Like $1,000? Right. So let's say you have a new iPhone, but what are you really paying for? Are you paying just for the iPhone, or are you paying for the service and for what it can do for you? Right? You see where I'm going with this? So anything that involves doing something for someone is a service. And I'll tell you what, you gotta be rich in order to pay someone to do something for you, because normally people in poorer countries, they're gonna be paying for food to eat. They're gonna be paying for clothes to wear. But if you can pay some dude $100 to cut your grass every single month, then you're rich enough. You make enough that, I mean, you know what I'm saying? I can't afford to pay someone $100 to mow my grass, but my brother does. And so that's the service. Or if you go out to eat and you spend $40 on something you could have bought from the store for $15, you're paying the server, you're paying the chef that prepared it, you're paying for a service. Yeah, you get a product, you get a steak, but you're paying for the service. Or if you go to the Avengers, I'm finally gonna get to go see the Avengers on this weekend at some point, and that's a service. Basically, services are anything that you can pay somebody to do, but you can't really hold services in your hand. I can go and get a haircut, but I can see the haircut, but I can't hold a haircut in my hand. I can't hold a bag boy at Publix taking my groceries out in my hand. So tertiary economic activities are going to be the things that really aren't going to help you very much in the zombie apocalypse, just to put it out there. In other words, you got to be rich to pay for these things. So today, just to kind of look at this one more time, a country like the United States, the majority of our economic activity is going to by far be in services, by far. And it's not only tertiary, but you can break that down into tertiary, quaternary, and quinary. And there's all kinds of different ways to define these, but I like what the AMSCO book uses. This is the way I've always taught in my class. Quaternary is going to be the knowledge sector. This is going to be stuff that you need high amounts of education to do, teaching, college professor, doctors, administrators, any people like that is going to be quaternary. Okay, quinary is going to be top dog decision making people like government legislators, elected officials, Mark Zuckerberg, or anyone who is a CEO who has a huge amount of power to sway politics or economics, period. Those are going to be your quinary. So tertiary, usually we're just looking at basic stuff like getting a haircut, getting served at a table at a restaurant, or whatever it might be. Quaternary, someone like me, someone like a professor or a principal. Quinary is going to be CEOs and politicians. So when it's all said and done, it's not about where teachers and politicians fall on the chart. It's about the why and where, right? It's about how, what does this mean in the grand scheme of things, right? And you look at a country like the United States and Japan, they're going to be high in services being provided. You look at a place like Congo or Nigeria, they're going to be very, very low on that comparatively. Here's another graphic that kind of drives this home, and I don't want to spend too much time on it, but this is the United States. 77% of our economy is in services, less than 2% of our economy is in agriculture. Whereas if you look at Nepal, which is in just north of India along the Himalayan mountains, the majority of them are doing some form of primary economic activity, probably subsistence agriculture, and only 3% manufacturing and 16% services. So Brazil would be an NIC. Notice that they've got a lot of services. Brazil is kind of coming out of that. I still look at Brazil and I think NIC, stage 3 country, but I mean, it kind of does have a larger service sector. Still also has a high amount of manufacturing as well. All right, so economics kind of moving on a little bit, looking at still looking at the sectors. If we're looking at the European Union, okay, again, very, very highly developed countries for the most part, primarily services, very little agriculture, like the United States. All right, least cost theory. Alfred Weber comes up with this least cost theory where he's looking at the, it's kind of like the von Neumann model, honestly, except it's applied to location of factories or location of different types of maybe even service centers. But usually you think about this in terms of a factory. Accounts for the cost of transportation, labor costs, and agglomeration. All right, so this word agglomeration, I think I've got a graphic here. Maybe I don't. Agglomeration is the idea that if you've got one business at this one place, other businesses may go there, and it's not going to be, they're going to compete with each other, but they're also going to share in the costs and in the benefits so that everyone kind of wins. Take, for example, if you are going down the interstate and you see one exit that has Burger King. All right, you might want a Whopper, but you might really not want anything at Burger King. And so you're less likely to stop at that than if you go to the next exit that's going to have Burger King and Chick-fil-A and Waffle House and Huddle House and McDonald's and Crystal and all these different places. You're like, wow, there's some food here, let's go. And then if you're like me and your kids want something different, you might find yourself at Taco Bell, at McDonald's for a Big Mac, and Chick-fil-A for the wife. Next thing you know, everyone benefits from being together, right? That's the idea of agglomeration. And you see it not only with things like restaurants, but also with things like factories. We're going to look at some examples in a moment. Bulk reducing and bulk increasing, in reference to the least cost theory, is the idea that products that are being manufactured are either going to be heavier when they're produced, which means they're bulk increasing, or they're going to be lighter, which means they're bulk reducing. All right, and there's other things that go into measuring that as well. It's not just weight, but it's also how much it costs to transport something. So if you're making potato chips, right? Potato chips aren't really lightweight. In fact, potato chips weigh less than potatoes, but they're really, really breakable because you can't just throw a bunch of pallets on top of potato chips. So it's going to cost more to produce them. All right. If you look at beverage companies like Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola is going to be something that gains weight during production. The secret isn't the water, right? So what they will do is they have manufacturing plants where they will bottle their product and they can get the materials to make the Coke, but the main ingredient in Coke is water. Well, water is super heavy whenever you put it on a bunch of cans and put it on a truck. So you don't want to carry it from one place all across the country. You want to carry it from several different nodes to the local population in that area via truck. You're going to save money on transportation, but a lot. These are also these are fabricated. Okay, so anything that's fabricated, which means that you take smaller parts and put it together into a bigger sum, like building a car, is going to be bulk increasing. Okay, they'll make the cars, they put them on one of those trucks you guys have seen a million times on the interstate, and take it to wherever it needs to be to get it sold. Anything that involves a process of like smelting, like so making copper or iron, or any of that stuff, this is going to be an example of a bulk reducing industry, because what's happening is you're taking out the impurities. In other words, you're taking stuff out of it, and the finished product is going to be less than what it was prior to. So this is going to be something that is an example of bulk reducing. All right. Other bulk reducing industries include paper production, lumber production, okay, steel refining. And these two examples here, you're taking trees, raw trees with limbs and everything. That's hard to carry. They're also super heavy. Once you create the paper, you can put them in little boxes, put them on a much smaller truck, and transport them more cheaply. Lumber, when you're talking about lumber, you build houses and fences and decks and stuff out of wood you can get at a place like Home Depot. It's way easier to carry that wood, that lumber, than it is to carry the original trees. All right. So the location triangle is used to demonstrate what Weber's model is intended to do. So let's say that you have a market. Okay. Let's say that you have two resources that go into this. You're going to locate your factory in the place where the transportation costs and the access to the market and the labor is going to be the best bang for the buck, somewhere within this triangle. So if you are dealing with bulk increasing industries, you might be like right here, really close to resource 1 and resource 2, and then bulk reducing, and then a little further away from the market. If you're looking at something that is bulk increasing or bulk gaining, you're going to want to be closer to the market and maybe a little bit further away from your resources, right? Like something like Coke, for example. Okay, so I do have an agglomeration slide. All right, agglomeration. There's an example that I gave. You would much rather stop where there's multiple food places rather than just one place that you may not want, unless it's like, I don't know, one exit with Chick-fil-A. I'd be more likely to stop there. One exit with Starbucks. My wife maybe would be more likely to stop there. Here's another example of a place where the restaurants take advantage of each other being there. Now, on a grander scale, okay, you also have places like Silicon Valley, okay? Now, listen carefully. The word technopole, that's what you're looking at here. And it is a form of, it's a region, technopole. It's a region like Silicon Valley that is very, very heavy on the tech industry. So Google, Facebook, Uber, you were talking right now, Uber's in the news. They're going public with their stocks, and at the same time as they're doing that, and the company's worth $90 billion, they're talking about how they rip off their drivers and all these different things. That's in the news literally right now. If you turn on nightly news, which don't do it right now because you listen to me, but you'll hear that stuff in the news for sure. But Silicon Valley is a technopole. It is not the only one. It is the most infamous by a landslide. All right, it is the most infamous by a landslide. I'm not sure why I just had menu come up. All right, there we go. All right, so other examples of where there's Silicon Valley. That's a few of the companies that are located there. I don't know if this is all of them or if this is an old graphic, because there's a few, like for example Google, that I don't see just standing out there. So, but nevertheless, here are some other technopole regions. So there's your Silicon Valley, the biggest and baddest of them all. But you've got other places like the Research Triangle, like Silicon Alley, which is going to be kind of in that region of New England where you've got, for example, Manhattan being the place where there's a big Google place there. That's where Amazon was talking about going, for example. So there's other places. I don't think you need to memorize them all, maybe have an idea of where a lot of these technopoles exist, but the main one I think you really need to know is Silicon Valley. And note also, these are examples of agglomeration. There are good reasons. This came from a article about Amazon that I shared on one of the earlier presentations. There are good reasons for industries to agglomerate. For example, they want to be where their suppliers and customers and competitors are. Same place. They want to be with all of that, and where qualified workers are available to hire. So these are both some of the key elements to why companies agglomerate. In the case of companies like Amazon, they are seeking to hire in demand, highly paid workers. They locate where their desired employees want to live. If that means they have to pay higher wages, or they have to pay higher property values, whatever it is, if they get what they want to make their company highly productive, which is the name of the game, they're willing to go there. All right. This right here, looking at the economic interdependence, going back and reviewing that a little bit. Global North, Global South, these by the way are terms that we don't really like in geography, but we need to know them because there's context here. If you look at this line called the Brandt line, all right, the Brandt line, type that up so y'all can see it. Oh. All right, there we go. It is like literally a line that you can draw on a map that almost completely separates the developed countries of the world from the undeveloped countries of the world. And now, I mean, look, you could argue that Russia is not super high on that, or that some of these countries in the Middle East shouldn't be like considered at the same level as the United States or Europe whenever you're looking at Human Development Index. But it really does get you thinking. Why is it all the rich countries up north and all the poorer countries are down kind of in the south, except you draw this fancy little line around, Australia and New Zealand, because they're up there as well. And they're also of, Anglo-European descent. So the idea here is that, when you talk about global north, you're looking at your developed countries. Global south is kind of a lingo for an undeveloped country. And the Brandt line is what you're looking at here. So these maps indicate there is a geographic trend to development. So why aren't other countries developed? If poor countries get rich, does that mean that rich countries get poorer? Well, there are two models that we're going to look at briefly. We talked about them earlier in the course. Dependency model is one of these ideas that the poor countries today are still somewhat dependent upon the rich ones for their development. And so the well-being of the richest countries come at the expense of the poorest ones. Think about agriculture. Think about some of the luxury crops that we like. Coffee, tea, cocoa. These are things that we need to get from tropical regions. Countries like the United States, we can't grow that stuff because of the climate. So we continue to import tons of that stuff, and even control the agriculture that goes on in many of these countries because of the demand for things like coffee. Countries that produce it agriculturally, they don't consume it, but they sell those things to us because there's a huge demand for something like coffee. And people say, well, these poor countries don't benefit from that because since they're selling less coffee, for example, they're not able to produce food for themselves to eat and support their family. It reduces the amount of opportunities they may have. So that's just one small example, but it's kind of the same idea about what the dependency model is. The age of exploration and imperialism also kind of factors into this because the dependency model almost seems like an extension of that. When today's most developed countries are developed, or during the Industrial Revolution, the rules of engagement, so to speak, were different. So no one cared about climate change and the impact of CO2 on the environment. We would just burn whatever we needed to do whatever we needed to do. There was slavery to handle agriculture in many countries. Everyone was okay with military force. So if you need resources, go take over a country in Africa, and everyone's going to be okay with that. So this leads kind of to, and someone asked a question earlier with Wallerstein's world systems theory. This is a model that goes in conjunction with the idea of dependency theory. So you've got your core countries we talked about that are high profit consumption goods. They sell their goods to the periphery as well as the semi-periphery. They also get resources and manufacturers from semi-periphery. They exploit cheap labor in places like China or Southeast Asia or places like that have cheap labor that, that's where our manufacturing jobs go for things like shirts and shoes. And then we take advantage of that and bring it back in a little bit more cheap. We also get raw materials and things like that from the periphery. So this graphic here kind of summarizes the world systems theory. There's another graphic that does the same thing. All right, and then still you can look at our map and see. Now again, this take it with a grain of salt. Not all these countries that are red. I don't think they're all what I would consider periphery. Most of the ones that are purple are truly semi-periphery countries. I would put most of South and Central America as semi-periphery. I would put most of the Middle East as, and maybe even Southeast Asia as semi-periphery. The core regions, I think, are probably correct. Enough on Wallerstein. We've beat that down. In Wallerstein's model, by the way, MDCs, the developed countries, the countries with the most wealth are the strongest economies. They are definitely going to be your core. They're going to be the drivers of the global economy. Okay. There's your economic core region. I just mentioned the United Kingdom, France, Germany, northern Italy, eastern Spain. By the way, Barcelona is the biggest city in the Catalan area. So we're looking at parts of Italy, parts of Spain are more developed than other parts of those countries, which would be somewhat more of the semi-periphery. So it's important to know that just because part of a country might have it going on, that doesn't necessarily put it as a core country. Weirdly, that circle does a really good job as encompassing what the economic core of Europe would be. And then here's another example of the core regions. Looking at the economic core, once again, notice Spain and Italy are light green because it's really just the northern and eastern part that would be more of your core countries. Dependency theory criticisms, just to go over it really quick. Foreign aid, they say that foreign aid is a form of imperialism, but actually foreign aid is proven to help countries, not hurt them overall. Overall, people are better off today than half a century ago. If you look at the the Millennial Development Goals, and whether or not we achieve them, we can definitely see that people are way better off today than they were even at the turn of the century. Only factors in economic influences. It doesn't account for cultural influences by countries like the United States. And it's also kind of outdated because this guy is thinking in terms of Western rise to development, using the Industrial Revolution, and things like that don't happen today. The other side of the coin is the Modernization Theory, in which it looks at the idea that wealth can occur for any country, but follows kind of a process beginning with, again, Industrial Revolution. This is Walter Rostow's stages of economic growth. The model he uses, a lot of times you look at it and we want to say, hey, that's a demographic transition model. I mean, look at that. It could be similar in that they follow stages and that there is a level of development associated with each stage that is similar across both models. But remember, the demographic transition model is literally about demographic transitions. Think about what those words mean. Demography has to do with population. Transition has to do with a change from one place to another. So for the demographic transition, the focus is on population changes. This right here is focused solely on development, the process of economic development over time. So it starts off stage one. You've got your traditional society. This would be agricultural societies. You know, they're bartering. This is how people would have lived like in the earliest civilizations. All right, and over a great amount of time, during the time leading up to the Industrial Revolution, they would have started this transitional stage of development where they start maybe looking at things like specialization or things like this. Really, I wouldn't say that stage two is Industrial Revolution just yet, but it's getting to that point. People are specializing. People are working in maybe a few services or maybe in a few things that are going to lead to producing one thing. For example, you might have had your cottage industry of textiles. Then eventually stage three, you're going to start seeing people produce tons of yarn that will help the cottage industry. And eventually you're going to see this huge takeoff as more and more people invent. People are start to invest in these inventions, and you start seeing application of the technology of these inventions in other places. Like, for example, it went from manufacturing textiles to producing steam engines that would help to extract resources and then also help to fuel locomotives, which eventually led us to your stage four, the drive to maturity. You see diversification. No longer are we producing one car, the Model T. Now we're producing tons of different cars using not just a assembly line, but using different types of manufacturing techniques where you might have people working together in tandem. to produce and to build, and you might have something like just-in-time delivery, and eventually you're going to see your high mass consumption, consumer-oriented, durable goods. Service sector is totally dominant, like what we are today in the United States. That's really what Rostow is looking at, and this is a far more optimistic, everyone can win kind of model. So people look at this and they think, well, it's great. I love Rostow's 5 stages model. It makes me feel good and warm inside. But there's also, and there's a bigger version of it, but there's also some criticisms of Rostow's model as well. The single biggest hindrance according to this model, so let's look at it. What if this doesn't work? Why haven't African countries, for example, already done this? If everyone can achieve development, why don't they do it today? Well, the biggest hindrance, according to the model of economic development, is lack of willingness to adapt, according to modernization theory. Well, you think anyone down there doesn't want to adapt to be more rich? There's more to it than that. This also puts the blame of economic disparity on the poorest countries themselves. They're poor because they don't do like we do. Why wouldn't they just do like we do and they'll be rich? That's a big criticism. Critics say the model only applies to the West. They say that there are outside forces that cause development disparities. All right, in other words, differences between how some countries may develop and others that are not related to culture and traditions of poorer countries. So that's really the criticisms of the model. There's also a few others. The model kind of relies on the idea of the exploitation, which occurred for Western countries. Remember, they were able to take what they needed from other countries. Today, countries can't do that. So there's going to be a way different look and feel to the different stages of the model today than there would have been back in the day. Linear change is not always the case. Okay, so you can't just say that a country's always going to follow this linear path to development. Today's a way different world than when other countries developed. And it also doesn't address sustainable development, which brings us to the MDGs. And actually, people are always asking me, well, what do you think are going to be the FRQ topics? I mean, there's no way to know, but it's always fun to guess, right? I always say we're dying for a central place theory question. And also, man, I'm telling you, I wouldn't put it past anyone to ask a MDG question. Even though they expired in 2015, they continued in the form of the Sustainable Development Goals. And man, I wouldn't think for a second that they wouldn't find a way to link the two together in the context, in the greater context of human geography. So I always make sure that we do a good job at covering this. Let me look at some questions real quick. I'm going to take a quick break. I've been going for about 42 minutes. I appreciate you guys all being with me today. I got a lot of people asking, why do you think we should spend most of our time studying? So I'm going to answer that question for you real quick. And there is a clear answer to it. Assuming that you have done more than just show up tonight to start preparing for the AP Human Geography exam, which I'm liking to think that you have, but I also know the world in which we live, and I've taught the class for many, many years. And I know that not all of you have. What you really need to do, if you've studied and you've prepared and you've looked at some stuff and practiced some FRQ, focus on where you're weakest. If you are super strong in urban geography, don't spend all your time looking at urban models. If you're not as strong in culture, then spend your time from here on out studying the stuff that you're weakest in and that you know you're weakest in. Study the culture, study the agriculture, whatever it is that you need help in or that you need to study the most, that's where you need to be. If you have not done anything to start preparing yet, or if you've only started like maybe this week and you have no idea what you're doing, you're overwhelmed, then what you're going to want to do is I would start with practicing FRQ. Okay, and you can do this in a few ways. If you don't think you can answer an FRQ, do it in groups of 2 or 3 or 4. Get your teacher, let you go during power hour or whatever you might call it. If you guys have a break during the day where you can get a chance to have an hour to kind of hang out, maybe during lunch, get with your friends, go to a certain place and answer a couple of FRQs. Then look at the rubric and grade it. Make sure that you know why you wrote what you wrote and know what the answer should have been. That's a great way to study content. All right. Also, something like Quizlet or Kahoot, you got vocab and different types of multiple choice. Again, I would look at those primarily if you haven't done anything yet to start studying. But hopefully you guys know where you're weakest and can hone in on those particular topics. The night before, I'm telling you, nothing between 6 o'clock at night and the night. I'm saying nothing realistically. I mean, I'm going to be on. I'm not saying don't come in here. I'm going to help you guys prepare yourselves mentally. But the point I'm trying to make is on Monday night before the exam, when you get done with me, go have a snack, chill out, watch a little bit of TV, go to bed at 9:30, 10 o'clock, get a good night's sleep, eat breakfast the next day, and be ready. Don't think you're going to change what you're going to make on the AP exam with anything you're going to do between 9 and 3 o'clock in the morning on the night before. All right, it'd be better for you to get a good night's sleep. That's what I would do if I were you. And I hope I answered that question fine for you guys, because I had a lot of you asking it. Another thing, just to add on, study practice FRQ. Also, all these review manuals, every single one of them have at least 2 tests. And I'm just going to be real. You guys can Google sample multiple choice tests as well. So get with your groups, get with your people, go through the questions together. If you don't want to do it by yourself, quiz yourself and learn the material. You can pull 60 average on the multiple choice for the multiple choice portion and be in a relatively good place to do decent on the FRQ and make it 4 or 5. So you want to do the best you can, but you don't have to have a perfect score. All right. How do we tell the differences between stages 3, 4, and 5 on the demographic transition? I think the question is asking, how can you look at demographic transition and see that shown on a population pyramid? It really has to do with the way, and I don't have anything on this particular slide that can show you this, but if you're looking at these different pictures, remember what you're looking at. First, when you're looking at a population pyramid, the bars at the bottom are either going to show the number of people in the country or the percentage. And whether it's the number or the percentage is going to cause the population pyramid to either look more skinny or more fat. So you have to make sure that you identify that. And then as you look at the structure of the pyramid, you can see trends as a country develops. You can see where there's a lot of people up here that are pretty old. And then there's fewer people being born. And that means that you might be a stage 4 or even a stage 5 country. Stage 1 and 2, stage 2 and 3 are always really easy to identify because there's usually a very pronounced pyramid shape. They almost looks like an inverted line. Stage 3 starts off super sharp and then kind of flattens out a little bit. If you go into, I'm not just saying this because it's my video, but if you look up Professor Dustin, a demographic transition model. This is one of what I think is one of the best videos I've made on my YouTube channel. If you look at the last 2 minutes of that video, you'll hear my super awesome rock out theme music. And over that, you will actually see where I have labeled specific countries in relation to the population pyramids based on what stage they're in. You may find that very helpful. It addresses directly what you're asking here for this. So I would definitely go and take a look at that if you want more on that. Can you explain the commodity chain? Commodity chain, yes. So what you're looking at for that is, I wasn't going to do it, but I actually want to, hang on. I actually want to pull up a my agriculture PowerPoint for that. Y'all give me 2 seconds because this is something that I can explain way better with a graphic. I can get there we go. All right. That'll give me just a second. I think it is in this one, actually. Well, that's fast, isn't it? Sorry for the delay, but that's an important question that many of you are asking about it. So I want to make sure that I answer it with and do it justice. Okay. Don't be stressed, Chassis. That's why you're here. I'm going to make it all better. Okay, so let's get down here to the bottom. I'm looking at. Sorry, it's running pretty slow here for me. There's all the stuff we were looking at last week. Still not there. So not there. It might be so slow because it's having a hard time loading my slides. All right. So when you are looking at commodity chains, it's going really slow. So hopefully I'll get a chance to go down there in a second and show you the graphic I'm talking about. But let's go back up here and look at these graphics here for a second. And again, I'll get back to what we're doing in just a minute, but I wanted to talk about this. So I'm explaining commodity chains. Notice here that you've got in this graphic, you got the bean belt, right? Now, notice that these are also the tropical agriculture regions. So we're not going to see places in North America and Europe producing a huge amount of coffee because you just don't have the climate for it. So we have to get this these coffee beans, or if you're looking at cocoa or whatever it might be, it doesn't matter. You're going to get they're all going to come basically from the tropical region. So there's coffee production by country. You can see that mainly places that are in the tropics are going to be producing coffee. Okay, so that said, the commodity chain is the process by which a product is going to go from one place to another. And I think that coffee and cocoa do a really good job at helping to illustrate what a commodity chain is. So let's say that you got coffee coming from Brazil. You got a farmer who's going to produce the coffee on his field. When he harvests the coffee, all right, he's going to lay it out literally in some of these countries on top of their house so that the sun can dry out the beans, all right, or the cherry, right? Because coffee actually grows on a cherry or in a cherry. And what they do is they dry out the cherries. They take the beans out of it. I'm sorry, they take the beans out of the cherry, then they dry out the beans. All right, and we say it right eventually. From there, they're going to take their beans, put it in a big old burlap sack, and take it to maybe a co-op or some kind of a place to get it tested for its quality, and then to find out how much it's worth. They're going to sell it to that group that's then going to ship it on a shipping container to wherever it might be. So there's actually, in my state, there's a Starbucks facility right outside of Columbia off of I-77, about an hour away from the port of Charleston. Then they receive these coffee beans in a burlap sack, and within a 2-day period, they process those beans, get them all bagged up, all right, get them all bagged up, and then they send that to the various stores in the local areas to be sold. That process that I just explained to you is the commodity chain. So it is literally the step-by-step process by which a good is going to start off and then end up in a different region. Here is the graphic that I've tried so hard to show you. All right, so from bean to bar, all right, so you've got the growing process. They're going to harvest it. They're going to ferment and dry it out on the roof of their houses. This is for cocoa beans. This is a little bit different, all right, but it's still a very similar process. They're going to take it to the bean market and get their monies for it. It's going to get packaged and transported to a roasting facility, usually in a different country. It'll be processed. It'll be made into the chocolate we all love, and then sold directly to the consumer. With coffee, here's what that might look like. Okay, or I guess, yeah, it's coffee example. You can also track commodity chains with shirts. I think that John Green, in his one of his world history videos, I can't remember which one, it might have been the Industrial Revolution, talks about the process by which a shirt is produced very briefly. And there is a great video in here. If you look at coffee bean commodity chain, if you do that, I'm pretty sure it will pull up. One of the top videos is going to be a video that shows this process. If you look at one of my old agriculture videos, I've actually shared those resources with you. Okay, can you give a quick rundown explanation of Yugoslavia Balkanization? It's going to be really quick, and I talked about this last week. But what you're looking at here is under Tito, who was a dictator, he was a communist dictator, wasn't part of the Warsaw Pact. So he was his own communist dictator, not controlled by Russia. But he was a pretty strong leader, and since he's communist, there's no room for nationality there. So everyone, despite their differences, were considered workers. He usually kept the place pretty stable, but after 1980 and he died, it started to fall apart, and you got local ethnic groups that kind of lived in certain regions of that area. Serbia in particular wanted to become their own country, and they wanted to control all the territory where Serbs lived, even large minorities of Serbs. And so they launched the war against places like Bosnia, for example. The Croats did the same thing. So all these places are attacking Bosnia and killing Bosnian Muslims in order to get land. And so eventually the NATO had to get involved and put into it. A few years after that, in the late 90s, you start seeing where Serbia again is kind of picking on the Kosovar Albanians. So Kosovo is part of Serbia, but the people that live there are Albanians and didn't identify with Serbian culture. And so Slobodan Milosevic kind of goes in there and starts killing off the Albanians. The United States, I guess NATO gets involved, and eventually in 2007, they elect to have a referendum to become their own country, which the United States recognized, but most of the world does not, because Russia is part of the United Nations Security Council. So in a very, very quick nutshell, that's the Yugoslavia Balkanization. Let's see. Can you explain central place theory and give real life examples? Man, you guys really want to hear about that, don't you? All right. So let's take a look back at the original presentation. Let's take a look back at the original presentation, just for a second. About an hour in. All right, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to go in and I'm going to continue as far as I can until probably about an hour and 30. It's going to give me a note telling me whenever I'm an hour and 30 minutes in. If I haven't gotten to urban geography by then, which I'm pretty sure that I will, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to move directly to the urban models, and one of which will be when I talk about the central place theory. So y'all, I promise I'm going to get there, but I'm going to try my best to go ahead and get there by following the slides I presented to make sure that I cover more material rather than going back and forth. So the Millennial Development Goals, also known as the MDGs, sometimes you'll see it called that, were something that the world, honestly, like a lot of people, all the United Nations, back then it was 191 countries, got together and met, and they were like, what we want to do more than anything is basically eradicate this first one, eradicate extreme hunger and poverty. And they wanted to do that as one of the goals, but they also kind of, in an overarching way, really wanted to help to bring people out of poverty and have them living better lives. Because I mean, at this point, huge numbers of people were super bad off. And in 2000 isn't that long ago. I mean, I was about to graduate high school at that time. So here are what the MDGs literally were. There were 8 of them: eradicate extreme hunger and poverty. Achieve universal primary education. Primary education, by the way, is elementary school. They wanted, at the very least, everyone who is a child to go to school and get like up to, I don't know, 5th or 6th grade education. That's not too much to ask, right? Promote gender equality and empower women. Y'all, number 3 is one of the most important things that you could possibly do if you want to truly have your country become a better place and be more developed, because that makes up half your labor force. And if all they're expected to do is stay home and have children, then you're never going to see your country as a developed country. Reduce child mortality. You want more kids living. You don't want babies dying. And some of the poorest places on earth, you still had babies dying, like tons of them. You also want to improve maternal health. Again, women that have children, you want to make sure they're going to be okay. That should be a basic, right? Everyone should have access to that. HIV and AIDS and malaria and other diseases that mainly ravage the poorest places on earth. We want to alleviate that, eradicate it altogether. Number 7, ensure environmental sustainability, which is pretty vague. And at the time, I don't really know if we had a plan for that. You know, we maybe start hearing DiCaprio and what's his face, Dick Cheney talking about global warming, but back then everyone's like, oh, we don't care about that, whatever. But today it may be a little bit different. And then you got this idea of developing global partnership for development, which is funny. If you listen to John Green's video, he's like, I don't even know what that means, so he didn't talk about it at all, which is pretty great. I really don't know what it means either, but we're going to try. These goals have human geography all over them, if you haven't noticed. If nothing else, they are a product of the world of globalization, and they represent the power of people to agree upon an enact policy to change the world. Have we succeeded with the MDGs? And here's the part where you would want to be able to tie into other units of the course in order to fully understand any question they might ask you about the MDGs. And let's take a look. You can find these results anywhere you Google it. There's also several videos, including a John Green Vlog Brothers video that I just mentioned, where they talk about whether or not the MDGs were successful. If you're not familiar with this, I would definitely go in and watch one of those after this review. Usually they're about 3 or 4 minutes long, so pretty short. But number 1, we greatly reduced poverty and hunger. I mean, by like more than 50%. This is one of the goals that we achieved substantially. Like, we exceeded our goal to reduce poverty and starvation. But we still have a long way to go. There's still people starving, right? Enrollment in primary education is about 90% globally, but there are still, if 90%, there are still 10% that aren't getting educated. So it's not universal yet. You could make your own, I guess, decisions about whether or not we achieve that. Women are still unequal with men in a lot of ways. In the developed world, you still got dowry deaths. I'm sorry, in the developing world, you still got dowry situations, arranged marriages in places like India, in Pakistan. In the United States, you've got this movement to make sure that women are treated fairly in terms of pay. Lately, you have the Me Too movement, which, no matter how you feel about that, it's a movement where attention has been given to the fact that there may be some degree of iniquity in the way that women are treated in multiple different scenarios in our workforce. Child mortality rates have gone down substantially, but you still have a lot of children dying before they're 5. Maternal mortality rates have fallen, but you still have places where you can do better with that. HIV and malaria have declined a lot. Like, there was a big push to add funding into that program that resulted in substantial decreases in those numbers. So we've done really well there. They still exist, right? But we've done a lot of damage to that one. Sanitation has improved. There's still a lot of issues. You look at a country like Lagos in Nigeria, for example, and if you look at the Daily Conversation on YouTube, has an awesome megacities series that, if you look at their megacities video on Lagos, you'll see the problems with sanitation in some of these fast-growing cities. And then economic trade has improved a lot, but the focus is still on how MDCs can benefit economically. So when you look at the next phase of this, in 2015, the MDGs are over with. Now what they've done is they've created 17 goals called the Sustainable Development Goals. And this word sustainable is super important for what we're doing. And simply what the word means is that we're going to take what we have today and fix it, and we're going to fix it in a way that later on is not going to cause a different problem. So anything that's sustainable, that's what we're talking about. So we want, by 2030, we want no poverty. We want zero hunger. We want good health and well-being, pretty vague. So I'm not sure how we define this, and it's only 3 or 4 years old at this point. We don't really know any data on whether or not we're achieving these things that I'm aware of. Quality education. I would guess that what this means is that we're going to have the kind of education that leads to economic opportunity and advancement for not just us in this country, but in general, everyone. Gender equality, complete gender equality, clean water and sanitation, affordable clean energy, decent work and economic growth, all these different things. You can see sustainable cities and communities with more and more megacities existing than ever before, and urbanization on the rise. Cities are growing substantially. You're going to see where sustainable urban development is a huge part of that. Climate action is a huge part of that. If we're causing the climate to change because of our activities, one of the things we must do as a globe, and not just as a couple of states here and there in one country, but globally, is find ways to fix that. And we are running out of time, right? You guys can look at the rest. The fact of the matter is, and what I would know when studying the MDGs, which are in the course description, okay, is you're going to want to know how these goals play into other units and be able to maybe even write about them. If you, for example, when we look at development, when we look at population, we spend a lot of time talking about gender inequality. We spend a lot of time talking about how some countries have higher birth rates and higher total fertilities because women don't have opportunities, so they have more children. Or you have kids who are getting married at 16 because of arranged marriages, which lead to higher population, but also lead to greater inequality for women. So I would look through these the MDGs. These are Sustainable Development Goals. I would look through the 8 MDGs and figure out how they play into other units of the course and be able to write about them, in a few scenarios. That might be a lot of work. I don't know that they're going to throw the SDGs in there, but they're very similar. They're just a little bit more broad in terms of their scope and scale. And also, another thing about these Sustainable Development Goals is that they are more applicable to not just developing countries, but the world as a whole. Everyone is in it to win it when you look at the SDGs. So I would like to think we can achieve that. Women in the workforce. Just wanted to kind of look at gender real quick. It's in the course description for Unit 6. But if you look at this, there is in some countries you've got no laws in terms of restricting what women can do. So in theory, women can do anything men can do in these countries. You're probably not going to see women play in NFL. You're probably not going to see as many women construction workers, but you're seeing more women construction workers. But there are some male-dominated fields, but there are no laws in most of your core countries that are going to stop women from doing certain things. Saudi Arabia only just like this year started letting women drive cars. All right, so I mean, I'm talking some countries are completely against women being on equal playing field. But you've got certain jobs that women can't do shown here, drive trains and 455 other restrictions in Russia. Women can't drive buses in Moldova. In China, they can't be cold water operations while menstruating. How are you going to find that out? Anyway, share of agricultural landowners who are female. So let's see. Let's look at this chart and see what it says. Many of the countries have no data for this. All right. Other countries say that, like for example, in the United States, up to, my thing disappeared there so I can see, up to what, between 7 to 14% of people who do agriculture are women that own land. And some of these other places, it gets as high as 28 to 35%. But then in some of the poorest places where most of the women are going to be the agricultural laborers, you're going to see where women don't own any of that land. So, and then obviously a lot of the data is not going to show for places that can't produce that data, which again are clearly your poorest countries. Another image that shows women in their workforce. Okay, I've already shown a few, so we're going to skip that. Overall, the overall model has proved not just self-sustaining, but profitable for lenders. What am I looking at here? What does this mean? Oh, okay. So apparently I got ahead of myself here with this slide. I want to talk about microloans. Now, I didn't put the link. Let me see if I can grab that link real quick and put it in the comments. Let's see if I can grab that link real quick. Okay. Let me get back to my presentation. Bam. Okay. Am I speaking a foreign language? I'm sorry. All right, so that link I just gave you is a link to this video, which shows how microloans are helping women to achieve higher levels of development. Now, I will also say, and I wouldn't, my mic fell. I will also say that lately you can find different studies that argue that maybe microloans aren't as helpful as we think that they are. But for the most part, microloans are known for being able to lift, in particular, poor women in poor countries out of poverty by giving them opportunities to take care of or to I guess take advantage of their entrepreneurial skills. All right. So I'll go back to that in a second. So while most would agree that microloans are making an impact, there are some criticism, like I said in the video, where some people can't pay back loans. But when you look at places like Grameen Bank, which is the #1 micro lending bank organization that started in Bangladesh to help mainly women in Bangladesh and other developing countries to be able to get like a few $100s here and there to be able to buy materials to start a business. Overwhelmingly, like it's 98% of them are able to pay their loans on time. So the only time usually that people can't is if they squander it maybe on house repairs or something that doesn't help them to promote, I guess, to create a sustainable business. The overall model has proved not only self-sustaining, let me get my captions back, sorry, and my pointer, but profitable for lenders, prompting plenty of for-profit enterprises to jump into the game. Today, I underline this, today it's hard to overstate how vast the microloan industry is. In 2015, estimated 125 million people worldwide, about 80% of them women, were receiving a total of about $100 billion in microloans from major microfinance companies like Grameen Bank. And Google did grab that right. All right. Comparative advantage in terms of establishing comparative advantage establishes the basis of trade. Excuse me. When we talk about comparative advantage, we're looking at an economics term, right? If you guys have ever taken economics, surely you know what I'm talking about. But it's the idea that some people are good at producing certain things, and they should produce that and trade it for things that they need, right? It makes sense. I always like to give a CrossFit example. If I'm going to do a partner workout with someone who's super big and super strong, I mean, you see me, I'm a skinny guy here. I can run a lot, I can climb the rope, I can do a bunch of double unders, but I'm not going to be lifting and doing like 315-pound clean squat cleans. So if we're doing a WOD where you got to climb a rope and you also got to do 315-pound squat cleans, I'm going to partner up with my buddy Big Gus. And Big Gus is going to be the one doing the squat cleans. I'm going to be the one climbing the rope. That's basic comparative advantage, right? In the same way, certain countries like the Asian dragons, the Asian tigers, whatever you want to call them, have risen up the ranks of development by taking what they're really good at producing and selling it in exchange for things they need. For example, all these countries are relatively small. Singapore and Hong Kong are like cities. Singapore is a city-state. Hong Kong is a city in that is actually technically part of China, but is not, economically like them. They're more of a free trade place. It used to be a colony of Great Britain. And Korea and Taiwan are both very, very small, places that don't have any natural resources. In turn, I guess they don't have any like farmland. So these places aren't going to be producing huge amount of food, but they're extremely good at producing certain things that the world needs, like for like different types of technology components or whatever it might be. Korea actually sells their culture. You guys heard of K-pop, surely. It's even bigger in parts in Asia and even weirdly Latin America than it is in North America. But they take what they are good at producing and they sell it out to places, and they've actually become extremely high levels of development. They've achieved high levels of based on the Human Development Index. These places are considered developed countries, very highly developed, because of their use of comparative advantage when it comes to international trade. They relied on trade in order to achieve high levels of development. It's not because they were to produce food, for example. They would use their I guess what we're trying to say, their product or their earnings, their money that they get from doing this trade in order to get the resources they need to survive. Here's an example of when you're looking at some of the most highly ranked places. This here would be your Human Development Index, right? So your most developed countries are going to be close to 1 as you can get. No country is at 1. So Norway is considered to be the most highly developed country in the world. Hong Kong and Singapore and South Korea are all in the 9s. And I'm talking Hong Kong and Singapore are in the top 10 of the most highly developed places on Earth. So we're talking they've really gotten there, right? For a point of reference, the United States is right here. And I think we live pretty well. So anywhere between 9 and 1 or 0.9 and 1 is a really good place to go. When I say they ain't got no resource, I'm talking about the Asian tigers, all right? So they had to use comparative advantage in order to get what they needed and in order to produce what they are good at producing that they then again will sell out. This is what I mean by they specialize in exporting things they're very good at producing. If you look at their exports, Taiwan is exporting, this here's exports, they're exporting refined petroleum, so like processed oil. They're exporting flat rolled stainless steel. I guess you would use that to make buildings and things like that. I'm not really sure. Copper, silver, these are things they're exporting, things they're good at producing. These are things that they actually import. So you have to get crude oil in order to refine it, right? They also bring in refined petroleum to use for whatever else they're gonna do. Coal, I don't even know how to pronounce that. Soybeans and corn. So there's a lot of food items in here as well that they're going to bring in as imports. And then again, you've got, I can't remember which country this is, probably Korea, I think. And then another one. I don't have the countries labeled here, but you get the point. The comparative advantage is what I want you guys seeing here. All right, the Asian tigers are great examples of the use of comparative advantage in order to promote international trade and become highly developed countries. All right, so let's go ahead and move on a little bit. Trying to get through as much as I can. All right, so when you look at manufacturing over time, just in time, manufacturing being the kind of manufacturing like that people that fabricate cars do today. You don't want to have a whole facility just filled with car parts that you're not using. So they would call in materials when they need it, put together a car, and then take it to the dealership based on what the dealership says they need in order to fulfill the consumer demand. Well, in the same way, services have adapted to meet such demands as well. So you start to see what we call flexible locations. There are some places in the world that you can locate something that's going to be cheap due to the location. And when we talk about location, we're looking at site factors, right? So you're looking at cheap land and also maybe cheap labor. I won a Surface Pro 3 maybe 4 or 5 years ago for a presentation I did at a Tech Fest conference. And about the 3rd or 4th day I had it, I was doing a workout at CrossFit. My daughter at the time, she was maybe 3 or 4 years old, and I had her watching a movie on it in the little play box area where the kids stay while we work out. She jumped on it and cracked the screen, and then the pen wouldn't work. So I had to go and call the services for Microsoft to see if I couldn't get that replaced somehow. I called a lady in the Philippines. All right, and the lady in the Philippines tried to help me get my Surface Pro fixed. I could tell that she was not in the country. She had a little bit of an accent, but her name wasn't like something that I can't pronounce. Her name was like Sarah or something like that. So when we talk about flexible locations, call centers are a really good way to illustrate what we mean. When you Google call center, by the way, you get a bunch of pictures of people that basically look like Americans or people from Europe or wherever it might be. Because we don't want to think about how someone in some country across the earth is trying to help us with problems, because if we knew that, we might think, well, they can't help us. They can't relate to us. They have no idea what we are. We can't understand any of that stuff. But notice also that when you Google call center, look at what you get up here. Philippines, India, Filipino. All right, India and the Philippines are extremely known for these call centers because they have a history of English through imperialism. Philippines were controlled by the United States. India was a British colony. These people are already speaking English. That makes sense that they want jobs working in call centers because they're considered higher paying jobs in those countries. Here, man, we do anything not to have to answer the phone all day and deal with people on their problems, right? So India and the Philippines are perfect in a business sense for this kind of work. They are NICs, and jobs in call centers that suck for us are going to be seen as high-paying opportunities. Some of these people actually will spend the night. They work long hours and spend the night in the call center. You can't find anyone in the United States that's going to do that. They already speak English, so you don't have to train them on that. They literally take courses on U.S. geography and culture and practice American accents. And you never speak with someone named Sandeep. You're always going to speak with Henry, David, or Michael. So that hopefully, if they're good enough with their accent and their knowledge of your culture and geography, you're not going to know that they're in a different country. That's why they want. This is actually what the call centers are going to look like. So again, that's what you're going to Google if you Google call center. I literally Google call center, use the snipping tool to take this picture. This here is what you're going to get if you actually are calling someone for help. There's a big difference, right? Globalization and communication technology has led to an increase of instances like this in the name of saving money. Now, let me put something down here in the comments for you guys. Oprah call center video, Oprah call center, any of that stuff, however you want to put that in YouTube, you're going to pull up something from like the Oprah Women's Network, whatever it's called. It's a short 5 or 6 minute video clip that shows the training process for these call centers that I was just telling you about. If you want a little bit more insight on that, I would recommend going in there and taking a look at that. Again, not necessary, but the fact of the matter is here, we're looking at the why of where as it pertains to economic activities. Why are you going to put a call center in the middle of Manhattan that's going to cost a tremendous amount of money, where you're going to have to pay people $50 an hour just to answer the phone call and handle issues that people might be having? They're usually pretty easy to handle when you can have that work done by people in India. And by the way, you can do it around the clock because people are going to be on a different time zone, or they're going to stay up all night in order to help you with the problems. Okay, so shifting gears a little bit, and I'm about to be moving on into urban geography, but you're looking at export processing zones. These are going to be places that are going to be used as incentives to attract manufacturing jobs. Sometimes you'll see them called special economic zones. Sometimes you'll see the word maquiladora, right? And we've all heard of maquiladoras. Here's a map that shows these different factories that exist near the U.S. border. And these things kind of emerged due to NAFTA, for example. Where you got a lot of businesses that maybe would have been in the United States going to take advantage of the cheaper labor right across the border. The materials they're manufacturing in these maquiladoras, which are, again, like I said, a form of special economic zone or export processing zone, are going to be sent back across the border and sold. And the benefits of that go towards the people that work here in the factories. And so that's what your maquiladoras are. Recently, there was actually a FRQ about this very thing. But you see these EPZs, these export processing zones, in other countries as well. Transnational corporations don't usually pay taxes on imports used for manufacturing in an EPZ. So as long as they are used for creating exports for that country. So in other words, if they benefit the country where they're at, then usually they get certain types of incentives. Export processing zones draw mixed reviews from critics. They benefits women who are able to earn more money and primary workers in those industries. That's a good thing, right? They also have promoted higher wages among populations, but critics are going to say that transnational corporations pay far less in the form of wages than they could afford to pay, especially if you think about what they would pay someone in an MDC, which I think is kind of the point, right? So we're going to shift gears and look at urban geography. Hopefully it won't take me as long. I actually feel like I might finish this presentation. So those of you who want the central place theory looked at, we're about to get that. All right. So urbanization, a process by which people are going to move to cities, right? There are always going to be site and situation factors involving where cities are going to be. If you look at some of your earliest civilizations, the site factors were the river valleys, which allowed for the fertile plains where you could irrigate. You could use the silt to fertilize your crops and grow higher yields to support your growing populations. You also have situation factors, such as if you look at Egypt, they're protected by desert on either side of the Nile River. Most people lived along the Nile River. And the Indus Valley, they're protected again by the mountains to the north. All right, you basically had to follow this kind of a path in order to get to anyone else outside of your valley. They also took advantage of the fact that you had these monsoon winds that would bring a lot of rain to irrigate the crops. All right, there's what maybe some of your earliest cities would have looked like, especially if they're in maybe Mesopotamia, because Mesopotamia doesn't have the geographic borders or boundaries, the protective mountains and deserts and stuff like that you would see in other places like the Indus Valley in Egypt. At least at that time it didn't. So in order to protect your village, they would have had to build walls. So usually people lived in the inside of this urban area, surrounded by a wall with all the farmland on the outside that they would use. So if something happens and someone's coming after them, they would run inside for protection. Many of these early civilizations were comprised of separate city-states. When we talk about a city-state, we are looking at individual cities that are governed like a country. Okay, so a state is a fancy word for country. Anywhere, any place that has territory, population, in other words, people living within it, and sovereignty. So if you look over here at these Mesopotamian cities, Uruk, Lagash, Umma, Kish, Babylon, what is it, God, I guess. These are all going to be places that are individual city-states that govern themselves. I don't know if you guys are ever familiar with the story of Gilgamesh, right? It's an epic poem. Gilgamesh was the king of Uruk. Abraham in the Bible was from the city-state of Ur before he moved this way and located in Palestine. Oops. Already looked at that. Here's an example of a medieval, ancient medieval town, again surrounded by walls and also on a hill for protection. Here is a Acropolis, the Acropolis in Athens. All the Greek city-states who have had something like this is a fortified hilltop. It is literally a hill, so that's your situation, your site factors. It's built on a hill in a way that they can build a wall in order to protect themselves in the case that someone came after them. You also have different types of rural settlements that exist, and this might look a little different in developed countries or in developing ones, but still today, you might have semblances of these rural settlements, and they're going to often be clustered or dispersed. And usually you look at this and think development. For example, in developed countries, in South Carolina, actually, right around where I am, there was a bunch of dispersed settlements, a ton of agricultural land with maybe one family here, and then miles down the road, you might have another family that owns a lot of agricultural land. In poorer countries, usually these are going to be clustered settlements because people are going to live close by for protection and also for each other in the event that they need certain services or certain things done. Here are some graphics that show what these rural clustered settlements may look like. You might have something like this where they're in a circular settlement. You might have something like this where they're in a long lot linear setup, maybe with a river going straight down the center. And here is a picture of what that looks like. This here was something that I took off the internet, but if you looked on Google Earth and looked at the St. Lawrence River, you could actually see these long lots along the river today. All right, so that goes back to the age of exploration. They still follow that pattern. Dispersed rural settlements were more common in MDCs because farmers own a lot of machinery that can help them get to all places on their farm way faster. So here's examples. This here is from right around where I live. You've got house here. You got maybe a house or maybe a part of the property. I'm not sure if this is different or not. Way over here, you've got a structure. Way over here, you've got someone living. All right, these are going to be places that are way dispersed or separated. They're not close to one another. They're not clustered like you would see in your LDCs. All right. Borchert's Epochs. This is something that is easy for a teacher to kind of gloss over. I don't think it's covered at all in any of the. It's not in Rubinstein. I don't think it's in the Aaron Faubourg book either. I've never seen it in a textbook, to be honest with you. But here are these something you would definitely want to know because it's in the course description. So in short, it's really not hard to understand. But as the United States developed into what it is today, there were different epochs or stages, if you will, of the way we would travel from place to place that directly went into how our cities are going to be built over time. All right. So this model, in a lot of ways, kind of correlates with the urban models like the concentric zone and the sector model. And I'll show you how once we get to those models. But the Borchert's, I always mispronounce it, Borchert's model, or his epochs look like this. You start off, most people at the beginning of our country in the 1700s, most people were walking to get to where they need to be, or they would ride on horses, or they would be, have a horse carry a wagon, or they might sail. So you can imagine that not many people were moving around like they are today. So therefore, cities usually just consisted of what we would now consider the downtown or the central business district. They weren't super crowded. They weren't super big. You didn't have to have ginormous cities because not a whole lot of people were going to move around so easily. It was a lot of work. However, in the 1800s, you start to see this iron horse epoch, which is characterized by the impact of steam engine technology. Now, I think I've got better slides on this, so I'm going to move on. The iron horse steam engine was invented. There was better and faster transportation as a result. You start to see where people are able to go farther because you can put steam engines on boats. And so you have steamboats. You also start to see the first locomotives that would take people back and forth maybe between a couple of cities. And so you start to see more people travel. And therefore, cities began to grow due to this interaction from place to place. And so you start to see where now the CBD is expanded into maybe a little bit of area around, and it's going to be more developed, and you're going to start seeing bigger buildings and maybe a little bit more space within those buildings to accommodate for the travel. Number 3, the steel rail epoch is characterized by countrywide railway networks that connected the East and the West. Now you're looking deep into the Industrial Revolution. You're looking at the 1870s, up to 1920s. So I wouldn't call that modern time, but we're looking at after the Civil War in our country. And you're going to start seeing tons of railways with trains that can go a really far distance, more than just between a couple of cities. CBDs, as a result, the central business districts or the downtown areas are going to grow way larger, and cities are going to start to expand outwardly, mainly starting to follow those transportation nodes. So if you've got a railway that's going from the city center, you're going to see development along that railway. The land near the transportation lines, as I'm just now saying, were the most expensive and caused the emergence of businesses and better housing along that place where they were easily able to access transportation. Rail cars and trains made transportation easier and encouraged growth in the suburbs. So if you think about your models, you're starting to see something that kind of resembles your Hoyt sector model, right? So you're going to see a CBD with basically wedges that started to form as a result of the transportation networks in and out of the city. The auto air amenity is known mostly for the gas combustion, in other words, modern cars. So for a time frame, you're looking at 1920 to 1970. And what this is going to do is make it so that people can travel extensively without having to use trains or rail cars. So now that you've got modern cars, you don't need to have these transportation networks stretching from the city center to the outside in the suburbs. People can literally go wherever they want to go as long as there's roads and they have a car. So number 4, you start to see something that looks more like the multiple nuclei model if you're looking at the models. We're going to look at that in a second. Also, interstates enabled much faster travel between cities, which led to edge cities, which again is part of the galactic or peripheral model, which is an extension of the multiple nuclei. So we'll get to those in just a second. High technology, jet propulsion and technology, or I guess the high technology epoch is notable for the jet propulsion. You start to see airplanes and faster travel, and you also start to see how skyscrapers are going to increase due to technology, due to the fact that cities become communication centers and service centers. All of these different things are going to radically change what downtown is going to look like. Sorry, I'm so boring. You know, honestly, I'm just trying to dig through as much of the content as I possibly can. So sometimes it's going to be like that, right? But everyone's going to get that 5 after the AP exam. So So there you go. All right, so urban settlements today come in all sizes and significance. And so here's a few of the models we're going to look at. World cities, you've got New York City, Tokyo, and London are the most influential cities on Earth. It's not because of how big they are. Tokyo is the largest city in terms of population, but New York City is the most important economically in the world. And it's because of the types of services and the importance of, for example, the United Nations is headquartered in New York City. These are going to be countries that kind of, cities that kind of spearhead the global economy. So if you're looking at core countries as the economic drivers, the economic drivers of those core countries are going to be their world cities. And New York, Tokyo, and London are the most important of them. Here's a map that kind of shows major world cities. I'm going to kind of go through this quick because I want to get to the models. When you look at Megalopolis, this is the idea that you might have some cities that are going to grow into one another over time. They expand so much due to urbanization that you can't really tell where the city ends. Another word for this is conurbation. So I would know that when we talk about Megalopolis, we're talking about the growing together of these cities, and conurbation is like the geographic term for that. The best example would be the Bosch-Wash corridor, but it's not the only example. So this one here would be what we're talking about with the Bosch-Wash corridor. In other words, it's going to be Boston to Washington, D.C. But you also have this Megalopolis, or this conurbation, kind of centered on Atlanta and going all the way across the southern states, Texas, this region here. So you've got other megalopolis regions as well, or mega regions as this map calls them. A mega city is simply going to be any city with 10 million people or more. There used to be only a few of them. Now there is a ton. There's like 36, 37 mega cities. The biggest cities in terms of population are going to be these right here. Okay, so these are here are the top 11. Tokyo is the most populous by a long shot, but you can see that Shanghai is catching up with it and will actually surpass it at some point. New York City is only in the top 10. All right, with way less than Tokyo. By the way, Lagos, Nigeria, I think I've got it in here, maybe I don't. Lagos, Nigeria is going to be the fastest growing city in the world right now. The largest urban areas, by the way, in 1950 were the ones you see here. So look at Shanghai, for example, and look at that here. All right, tremendous growth in some of these Chinese cities. New York has grown as well since then. Okay, so some of the problems that mega cities are going to face include these things here. It doesn't matter where you are in the world, whether you're in New York City or whether you're Lagos, Nigeria, or Dhaka, Bangladesh, there's going to be ethnic and cultural tension because of all the different people mixing together as one. You're going to see wealth divisions. Mexico City is a place where you're going to see tremendous wealth divisions, joblessness. There's going to be infrastructure concerns. There's going to be environmental concerns. The thing is, the difference is the level of development. So in places like New York City, those are going to be bad by maybe our standards. You might see in the news Chicago, for example, as a city that gets picked on. But if you look at Dhaka, Bangladesh, the problems are going to be exacerbated in places with low levels of development. Squatter settlements are going to be the regions on the outside of your poor countries, cities. So if you look at, for example, I just pointed out Lagos or even Mexico City, or Rio de Janeiro, the areas on the outside of those cities might look something like this and be kind of ramshackle buildings thrown together on property usually that is not even owned by these people. And they live on literally on the outside or the periphery of their cities. Here are some other examples. Here comes from, you see Fiveable in Call of Duty. That's another example of a squatter settlement or a shanty town. Here is Vin Diesel in one of the Fast and Furious movies when he was in a favela or a shanty town. Okay, I've skipped a little bit. I want to go ahead and talk about urban models and get us through here and probably end on the central place theory. So you got several different models here. Now these, I actually created some videos right now. My three videos getting the most traffic on my YouTube video are my urban models videos. So if you want to see them, feel free to go in there. Apparently, a lot of people find them helpful. But here's just an overview of these models. The one you're looking at here is a central place theory, sometimes called the Burgess model because it was named after Burgess. There we go. And again, this one here, if you're looking at Borchert's Epochs, this is going to be kind of your 1800s model. Okay, so you got your CBD here in the center, your downtown. In that time that the model was meant to emulate, you're looking at mainly factories and industries being located there, not so much the services we have today. Therefore, in this region here, you've got kind of a transition where you've got some factories. You also have people that were poor that worked those factories living here. So you call this the transition zone. Then in the next zone, you've got the zone of better housing. So you've got like this here would be like you're starting to look at some. I wouldn't say you're starting to look at middle class. You're really still looking at poor people that are going to work in factories. This is not the zone of better housing. Sorry, this is the zone of independent workers' homes, as it says right here. Independent workers' homes. So these are going to be outside of the transition zone. Notice also the reason why it's called the concentric zone model is because according to Burgess, it's almost like you can draw circles around the city center, which is going to show more or less where people are going to live relative to the work being done in the city center, and also correlating to the wealth they have. So when you get into the zone of better residences, which is going to be your next circle, that should be the light green, you're going to see. I'm sorry, nope, the D. I keep on mixing up where I'm looking at. Zone of better residences is going to be further out. All right, this is going to be your suburban middle class people that can afford to live further away from the hustle and bustle of the busy city center. And then eventually, on the outside, which I don't have a graphic with the color there, you're looking at the commuter zone. All right, so in other words, people that live way further out where land might be cheaper, they're able to build very large houses and live kind of more isolated away from the city center. All right, so that's how Burgess looks at it, and he applied this model to Chicago. Homer Hoyt looks at this model, and very soon after says, no, it's not as much concentric zones as much as it is these sectors that stem from the city center. And so he looked at it like this: the blue in the city again is center again is a CBD. All right, that's always going to be the case with these models. But rather than have concentric zones that circle the CBD, you're going to have places that are kind of close to it in some other kind of a way, but maybe stick out almost like these sectors that stem from the CBD. So again, site and situation play a part here. Number two is going to be your factories and industries. So you can imagine that people living in number three are going to be your low-class housing where people are going to work in these industries. Again, we're looking at maybe the early 1900s. The middle-class residential is going to be these areas that kind of start near the CBD, but move out towards the city's edge, and also are going to be sandwiched between the high and the low-class housing, or on the other side of the industries. And then finally, this number five is going to be the stem that shows where the high-class residential will live. And those would be either larger houses that have access to the city center, but also have access to more land that they can build bigger houses on further out. This, again, these wedge shapes they're shown here in the model kind of go back to the addition and invention of the rail car. This is the Hoyt sector model. Homer Hoyt being the person that created the model. Sometimes you'll see it called sector, sometimes you'll see it called the Hoyt model. This here is the multiple nuclei model, and you can see when I made the video, I actually drew out the model and colored it as I was talking about it. I thought it was pretty cool. Couldn't find a decent picture and didn't feel like making one. So very similarly, according to the Borchert's model or Borchert's epochs that we looked at earlier, this here is going to occur once there are more cars involved, and so you will still see the city center, which is going to be this area right here. The city center, CBD. The area right here would be your wholesale light manufacturing. So you might still have some industries nearby, but then you've got low-class housing, again, near the city center, close enough they can fill in some of the jobs for this manufacturing. Then this big area here might be represented by middle-class housing, and then this region on the outside, again, would be your upper-class housing. You have heavy manufacturing on the outside of the city. Now think about this. You don't want to have your heavy manufacturing on the inside. With transportation the way it is, and you're able to maybe bring things in a little bit further, You don't want stuff that's super heavy being so distant that you can't get where you need it, but you also don't want these things taking up the most valuable land in places where you can have other industries or markets available. So they start to locate this maybe a little bit further out on the, a little bit further out than the city center. Then you might see your outer business district. This here might be the start of maybe services that might emerge because there's a demand for it in the area between the rich and the middle class. We have more money. Residential suburbs on the outside of the city. That's where this is here. And then you might also have an industrial suburb. So you start to see the emergence of these regions that really don't seem like they're super close to the city center. They're almost like outlier regions made possible due to the invention of automobiles that allowed people to travel in ways never before seen. All right, so the extension of this, so this here is created by Harris and Ullman. There are two geographers, Harris and Ullman. There he goes, right there. And Ullman, no, I'm sorry, Chauncey Harris, later on kind of reinvented the model and adapted it to show what he calls the peripheral model, also known as the galactic city model. So I would know both of those terms. I would know that galactic city and the peripheral model are one and the same. All right, and what this is it kind of shows this image that if you look at Atlanta here, there's a beltway that goes around the city. Right, so everything that is Atlanta is more or less in the center here, and all this is going to be part of the development around Atlanta. But once you start to get around the beltway, you start to see these other urban centers emerge, and some of them start to be places that kind of emulate the CBD. So think about this: at the time of these models here, the city center was a manufacturing center. At the time of the galactic city model, you start to see a change so that most of the things that are going on in the urban center is going to be mostly like service-based. So you start to see where a bunch of office buildings and things like that emerge in the city center, and more people start moving out to live in the suburbs to get away from the city. Only recently has people started moving back into the city center as people have started to try to change the way the urban areas look and feel, which is kind of getting into new urbanism. I'm not sure if we're going to get to that today or not. But in these edge cities that started to emerge on the periphery of the city, you're going to see these office buildings and retail and hotels and malls and things like that emerge, where people basically don't really even need to go into the city center. In fact, some of these edge cities act and operate like cities in and of themselves. So here's the model that's in the Urbanism book to demonstrate the edge city. Again, you've got your beltway, all right, your beltway going around the city, and then all these different areas on the outside of it are going to be areas where you start having services that might have usually traditionally been found in the city center start to emerge on the outside. Okay, and then you've got your Latin American model. So these these four that we looked at first are the North American model cities. You've also got Latin American model, which is very similar in the way it looks. This here was created by Deblay, I'm pretty sure. And the things that you want to know about this is that the CBD and the spine, all right, this is where your rich people are going to live nearby a market. All right, the areas on the outside are also going to be your elite residential sector. The purple area, which is called zone of C2 accretion, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that well or not, is like your transition zone. So some of these people are going to be like middle class to poor, depending on how far away you are from the city. And then the areas located in the disamenity section or the periferico, these are your shanty towns, your favelas, your squatter settlements. All right. So the point here is the poor people live on the outside of the city. The richer people live closer by on the inside of the city. And also you've got this colonial legacy in there as well. So Mexico City would be a good example of that. I'm going to skip Africa and Asia for now because I don't want to answer the central place theory. I've only got about 10 minutes to do it, which should be more than enough time, but I want to end on maybe a few more questions. So here we go, finally looking at central place theory, like I said I was going to. Geographers use this in order to help them understand what people are going to do in order to access certain services based on the size of the city. So larger settlements tend to offer services you can't find in smaller settlements, right? Because they're more specialized. So Walter Christaller proposed the concept of a central place in the 1930s, and he used hexagons to do it because circles, I mean, it's a model, right? You're not going to see hexagons on the world map. If you go and you use Google Maps, you can see, and we're going to look at a few. Right, here's one right here. All right, so you can look at this city of Minot, I'm not sure how to pronounce that, but you're going to see this is a central place, and then on the outside of this, you have smaller cities, and you're not seeing hexagons, right? The hexagons are used to demonstrate the phenomenon that the model is trying to portray. If you use squares, it wouldn't look right because it would all look perfectly even, like a pattern. If you use circles, there would be weird overlappings. The hexagons do a great job at showing like your big city in the dead center, all right? And then around that you have larger, but smaller cities than the red one, but larger than these. And around this, you might have other smaller towns and cities as well. So in the blue areas, you might find certain services you're not going to find in these little podunk towns, right? So right now where I live, if I'm going to go see a movie, I'm going to have to drive to Augusta or to Columbia. Augusta will take me about 40 minutes to get to. Columbia will take me about an hour to get to. So that's not true. Actually, I do have a movie theater here, but if I want to see like a legit movie and in the big recliners and things like that, that's what I have to do. So if I want to see I don't know, like a play, I gotta go to Columbia or Augusta, right? Now, if I want to go to Carowinds, I need to go to Charlotte. Or if I want to go to Six Flags, I need to go to Atlanta. All right. So these are going to be bigger cities that offer services that don't exist in places like Augusta or Columbia. All right. So if I want to see Taylor Swift do a concert, there's got to be a place where Taylor Swift can do a concert, or wherever it might be that you end up going. So the point I'm trying to make is that larger cities that get a lot of people coming in are going to have services available that you can't get from places outside of that. And that's what the central place is all about. So people that live within this realm around this city are going to go back and forth to that city looking for services that they need that aren't accessible in places where they may live. Now, if you look here, you can see this. Notice that Minot is a big city. Then you've got other smaller cities that are reasonably centered around Minot. And then you got smaller cities as well. So if I live in Bowbells here, and I want to, I don't know, go to the mall, I can go to Quinary and find a mall, right? But if I live in Bowbells and I want to hear Snoop Dogg at his latest performance, I might need to go here to do it. You see what I mean? So again, the larger the city is and the more people that go and interact there, the more specialized the services are going to be. And another way of looking at this is it would not be practical to have an NFL team in Atlanta, all right, and then also have an NFL team like right down the road in a smaller city on the outside, because then you have that one service in a place that's so close together that it's not going to be profitable. So if you look at a place like if you think about a market area of a place like McDonald's, right? McDonald's there's gonna be a million McDonald's. You can go right down the road a couple of miles and get to a different McDonald's, or Walgreens, or Burger King, or Waffle House, or Chick-fil-A, or whatever it might be, right? CVS. These are places that are a dime a dozen. Right? Even Walmart. I've got 2 Walmarts within maybe a 5-mile radius of where I live. So the range is going to be the amount of distance people are willing to go there, right? So I can go to McDonald's here. I'm not going to drive 50 miles to go to McDonald's if there are other places like it nearby. But I might be willing to drive 50 miles to go to a car dealership to buy just the right car, right? So if I'm looking for a specific car, I might be more willing to go there. So if I'm wanting to go to an amusement park, all right, I might be willing to drive to Atlanta to go to Six Flags. Or if I really want to do it right, I might be willing to drive to Orlando to go to Disney World, right? So these are places with huge range, again, relative to the kind of service being provided, all right? So the more specialized the service, the more people are going to drive from far and wide to go there. The threshold is the minimum number of people needed to support the service. So if you had a NFL team, actually a perfect example of this is Columbia used to have a hockey team. South Carolina, Columbia, South Carolina used to have a hockey team. Man, we don't care about hockey. I mean, honestly. So the Columbia Inferno, as it was called, and I'll tell you what, it gets hot as crap here, so that's a pretty adequate name. But nobody went there to see hockey games, and so they didn't have the minimum number of people needed, and the team dissolved. There's no hockey team in Columbia anymore. That was a very short-lived thing. So range and threshold help us understand central place because it factors into how far we're willing to drive for certain services and kind of helps us to understand why large cities might be places that attract more people from areas around it than some of these smaller cities, because there are certain services people might want to access that aren't going to be accessible in smaller cities. All right, so that's the point there. Does that do it justice? I feel like a lot of people ask me about the central place theory. I hope that I explained it well. Really, it's a pretty simple concept. It's easy to understand when you think about it in terms of the size of the city relative to the specialization of the services that are provided there. All right, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a large city. For example, when I go and I see Avengers tomorrow, I'm going to go to this little podunk city out nearby in the area where I live. Because there is a drive-in, like a legit drive-in like you see in the movies. And I think that's awesome. I love that. That's my favorite way to see movies. So a lot of people will go to a little podunk town to watch movies at the drive-in, because where else are you going to get a drive-in, right? So so that sometimes, most of the time though, these special types of services are going to be located in cities where you're not going to be able to find those services in other places. So I want to end on questions. I only have a few minutes. Let's see what y'all have been asking. So I just answered central place theory. I provide a real life example by looking at the map. There are also examples of that looking at particular, like I think Kroger grocery stores in the Urbanism book. So take a look at that if you need to. Horizontal versus vertical integration. All right. Yeah, I honestly don't. I guess you're asking about. I don't think that's important. I don't know if I understand what you're asking there. The definition of gentrification, that was a actual FRQ topic last year. That would not be an FRQ topic this year. But what you see in gentrification is where places that are traditionally places where a lot of poor people live within a city center. People will go in and start to gentrify that, meaning that they're going to make tear down maybe old factory shells that might exist and turn it into a condo, or a condo where only rich people can afford to live there. And they might put like a coffee shop here. They might put like a fine dining restaurant nearby. And what's going to happen eventually, as more and more of these places kind of sneak into this area that is traditionally an impoverished region where poor people have lived for generations, the property value is going to grow so substantially that the poor people can't afford to live there. And what you're going to see is usually an influx of usually rich white people and the displacement of what is usually poor people that might be African American or might be some other ethnic minority related to the history of that city. So it seems to be almost a displacement of the poor to make way for like services that are not attainable by them. So Cincinnati is an example of a gentrifying neighborhood for sure. The flip side of that is new urbanism, which is really more of a sustainable approach. You're trying to create an urban environment that is conducive to everyone and also very walkable, and that exists in a way that is going to be better on the environment and also better for people's health in general. There's a really good TED talk on gentrification, and there is a long, almost like a debate by this Canadian guy. I think his name is like Steve Panchin or something like that on YouTube about gentrification. If you want more information about that, Okay, so that's really all that the time I've got. I've got questions about the multiple nuclei model. Look, I will be doing Cram sessions on Saturday and also Sunday and also Monday. Sunday is Mother's Day. Look at Fiveable for the times on that. If you are a Fiveable Plus member, you can join me for those. On Saturday, we're looking at the FRQ. Sunday, we're looking at the multiple choice, and then around make you feel